I want to make sure I was alive.
There's 16,000 of you out there watching still. 1 a.m. Eastern. No problem.
Fair, that's fair. I mean, you're allowed to show up alive.
Yeah. You can't stack Ben if you're dead.
If I'm dead, I can't stack him.
1,800.
Exactly.
Wow. That river then killed my action.
12 cards.
Rampage now.
Playing 100, 200, 400 with an $800 straddle. Ben raises it up with a Jack 10 offsuit in the hijack seat, which is a little bit loose, but perfectly fine. Over to Double M and the cutoff of Queen 9 suited, who opts to call. I think 3-betting this could be perfectly fine. This is a hand that you can easily 3-bet and maybe even stick around against a 4-bet if it's not too big. That said, again, calling is also fine. And then over to Rampage Poker, our hero. I love watching Rampage Poker play. He gets in there, he battles, he's often in tough scenarios, and it's a lot of fun. And in this video for PokerNews.com, he picks up pocket kings and makes it huge. $12,000. You may think, why would you make it so big? Your opponents are just going to fold every time. But you have to realize, when you're playing very, very, very deep stacked, as they are, notice they are playing $300,000 deep with an $800 big blind. So what is that? I can't even do this math. 350 big blinds or something like that. When you're playing that deep stack, you want to make sure that you do everything you can within reason to cut off your opponent's implied odds from in position. If we were playing a lot shallower stacked, perhaps a 3-bet to something like 9,000 would be fine. But when you're playing very deep stack like this, you need to go big from out of position, and that's exactly what Rampage Poker does. Let's see how his opponents proceed.
Red kings.
Sure. Where's the button?
Button is on Joe.
On me.
Why with that?
Oh no. It's bad timing for Ben.
You don't know exactly.
Plus, no, we're going to go extra. Probably 2 hours left.
Bumped it up. The price went up to 33,000.
Oh, your friends?
800.
No.
33.
Rampage with kings and a legion of boom behind them. 400 people with a piece, all tuned into this pot. Players with infinite behind.
I get my... I'm getting cocktail.
Starts with a call, pretty standard at this depth.
33. Kick right, yeah.
Heads up.
Jack 10 gets a little bit frisky. It opts to put in the 4-bet. Jack 10 offsuit is not a particularly great hand to 4-bet with in general, just because it kind of has a difficult time flopping very premium hands. Unless you flop a straight or 3 of a kind or 2 pair, you're really not loving it because your opponent who 3-bet from out of position probably has a pretty good range. And even if you make 1 pair, you could be either against a hand like Ace Jack when it comes Jack something something and you're crushed, or they could have something like Pocket Queens when it comes Jack something something and then you're crushed. You would usually much prefer to use some sort of suited connected hand or suited ace to put in the re-raise bluff, because usually then you have some very clear live outs. And if you do happen to make something like a flush, that's amazing. That said, Ben likes to bluff. He gets in there, he bumps it up, and then Rampage has an interesting decision. And I think he does the thing that makes the most sense, which is to call. Especially if you think your opponent's range contains far too much junk, which may be the case at Hustler Casino Live in this very battly game. You really want to keep them in. If Rampage was in position in this hand, it would definitely be a spot to call. The only reason he may want to go ahead and re-raise is purely because he is out of position. That said, if you are playing 350 or so big blinds deep and your opponent wants to get all in before the flop, kings actually don't love that scenario, because if your opponent's decent, their range is going to be something like aces and then a bunch of suited ace-X. And a lot of people aren't insane enough to put in $300,000 with a suited ace-X. So this is certainly a dicey spot for Rampage. I think a lot of people just automatically put in a 5-bet, but I do think calling is certainly viable, and it becomes even better and better as your opponent's going to be 3-bet or 4-bet bluffing with more and more random offsuit marginal hands. So, a lot of pre-flop action. Let's head to the flop.
Oh, 3 jacks for a blank check.
Check.
And he checks it back.
The flop comes ace, jack, jack. Rampage checks as he will do with his entire range in this scenario. And then, very interestingly, Ben snap checks it back. Look, I don't know anything about Ben's poker strategy. I don't know anything about his tells. But when someone does something that's very out of the ordinary, usually alarm bells should start going off immediately. And you have to ask, do people usually snap check back in 4-bet pots with anything on ace XX? Do we really think he's just going to snap check back with a hand like pocket queens here or pocket tens? Or is he going to think a little bit to hopefully try to make Rampage not bet the turn? I don't know. I think in this scenario, when most people snap check it back in this spot, they really like their hand. I know I have the benefit of being able to see the cards. I do my best to not be results oriented in these videos, but when you see something kind of weird, like a snap check back on the flop in a 4-bet pot, you should think, why is this happening? Is my opponent really blatantly face up and they have something like pocket queens, or do they have a super nut hand and they really want to induce me to bluff? Let's head to the turn.
The check.
Yeah, and Rampage might want to. Oh, he's in high.
That ace probably saves Rampage, though. Way ahead, way behind. Starts with a check again.
Dude, you gotta slow down. I'm gonna trip, God forbid, and fall on your face. So I was just too excited. I know. Are you gonna fuck them, Jack? Yeah.
Bet. That much.
A splashy bet on the turn from Ben.
48 large.
It's so hard to fold to Ben. He could just have any 2. Does he call this bet? He does. He's going to need a king.
Calls 48.
He's 6%.
The turn brings the 6 of spades, putting up a backdoor flush draw. Rampage has a very easy check again with this clear marginal made hand. And then Ben does something else that's a little bit weird. Most people in 4-bet pots, when they snap check back the flop, don't just casually count out $48,000 and splash it in. Look, I realize players are very tricky in these games. Maybe this is strong, maybe this is weak, I do not know. If I'm playing against a generic opponent who is kind of loose and kind of aggressive and kind of battly, I mean, they are playing with a ton of money here in this 100, 200, 400, 800 game, I'm probably going to consider finding a pretty big fold in Rampage's spot. I hate folding. You all know I hate folding. But live reads accounted for, I think this is a spot where your opponent's going to be heavily tilted towards something like the nuts, meaning a jack, pocket aces, ace, jack, like a really, really, really good hand. And if that's the case, your kings are in terrible shape. Now, with no reads, which, maybe Rampage has no reads on Ben, or maybe he has the opposite reads. Maybe he thinks these things that he is doing are actually weak, which could be the case. Maybe he's just mixing it up this one time. With no reads, or if you think Ben's weak, I think you just have a very easy call. This is a scenario where when you do check call the turn, you're going to be put in a lot of pretty rough spots on the river, but I don't think we have any other good option in this scenario besides to call. So I would call. One thing I do want to point out before we go to the river is I don't really like Ben's turn bet size. When he goes 48,000 and Rampage calls, he's going to set up the stack such that Ben cannot reasonably shove the river. And in this scenario, if Rampage ever has an ace, he's going to call the turn and he's going to call the river pretty much no matter how much Ben bets. So I think in this scenario, Ben should probably be a little bit greedy in this spot, because if Rampage does have a hand worse than an ace, he's probably not going to call all that big of a river bet anyway. But if he does happen to have an ace, like ace king, ace queen, which certainly do make a decent amount of sense, he's pretty much going to be forced to call down. So I think Ben should have considered how much the pot would be on the river, given various turn bet sizes. And I think if you bet a little bit bigger, that would make shoving the river better, and that would just allow you to get a whole lot more money in the pot. In no limit hold'em and no limit games in general, or pot limit games, pots typically grow exponentially. So the more money you get in on the early betting rounds, the more money you can get in on the later betting rounds within reason. All right, Let's go to the river. See if Rampage spikes the king.
Nothing.
Check.
How much can Ben extract? Ben targeting ace king, ace queen. How much will those pay? That's what he thinks Rampage has. Contemplating. More chocolate, little bit of green on top.
Bet. 83 large.
Half pot, says blank check.
The river is not a king. I don't really understand. How did this happen to Rampage? He just has a marginal bluff catcher. That's abnormal. All right, on the river, Ben casually puts in 83,000. Notice here again, if he made the pot a little bit bigger, perhaps he could have ripped it in and gotten full value from an ace. But in this scenario, this just might be the right bet size to get called by something like pocket kings. Let's see if Rampage can get off the hook.
Tension is high.
Alright, fine. Call.
He calls. Pot 333,000 going to blank check Ben. My goodness.
Thank you.
Massive pot.
Ben, you're savage. It's a trip.
Oh, Lord. Rampage down to 154,000. Peak incinerated.
Thank you, Ben.
Professional.
Rampage cannot get off the hook. And look, I certainly don't fault him. You have to realize in this scenario, you don't especially want to have hands with a spade, because those are hands that may decide to bet the turn and bluff the river. Rampage has no spades. Now, the kings are somewhat relevant blockers to hands like King 10 or King Queen, but look, I don't think this is a spot where most people are bluffing all that often, and I don't think it's a spot where most people are value betting too thinly. However, Ben is clearly in there. Ben is clearly battling, and if that's the case, when you have a reasonable bluff catcher, sometimes you just have to pay. And Rampage loses the biggest pot of his life, $333,000. Tough one. You know what I want to know? I want to know, what's the biggest pot you ever lost? Take a second, write it in the comment section below. One time, I lost a $100,000 pot in a 100-200 game. Long story short, I got it all in with middle set on the flop against a guy who I was very sure had aces or kings. The flop was Jack 9-3, I had pocket nines. The turn comes a queen, the river comes a 10. I table my hand. The opponent looks at his card and says, "You got it," and tries to muck. The guy next to him says, "No, you win, turn your hand up." He says, "No, I don't have it." He goes to muck. The guy grabs the cards out of his hands, tables the pocket kings for the backdoor straight that the opponent did not even realize he had. And then I lost the biggest pot of my life in a cash game. Fun times. It's always fun to reminisce on this channel. We actually reviewed Rampage's previous largest pot. We'll put a link to that below. You can go check that out right now, where he actually won that hand, believe it or not. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You gotta be in it to win it, though. That's gonna be it for today. If you enjoyed today's video, do me a favor, click the like and subscribe buttons down below. Click the notification bell. Make sure you check out Rampage Poker's YouTube channel. Also check out Hustler Casino Live. Huge thanks to them for letting us use their content. And thanks for Poker News. Thanks to Poker News for all the great coverage they do and for putting this video on their website. Good luck, have fun, and if you play the biggest pot of your life, I hope you win.